Our speaker this evening is Bishop James Conley, Bishop of the Diocese of Lincoln, Nebraska. Bishop Conley graduated from the University of Kansas with a degree in English literature. While studying there in the university's well-known integrated humanities program under Professor John Sr., he converted to the Catholic faith. Since his priestly ordination in 1985, Bishop Conley has served the Catholic Church in a wide variety of ways: as pastor, college campus chaplain, director of Respect Life Ministries, theology instructor, Vatican official, and bishop. In all these tasks, he has seen his life as a priest as a call to service and complete surrender to God's providential hand. In 2012, Bishop Conley was appointed Bishop of the Diocese of Lincoln, Nebraska. For his episcopal motto, Bishop Conley chose the same motto as the great John Henry Cardinal Newman, cor ad cor loquitur, meaning heart speaks to heart. We are greatly honored to welcome for the very first time to the Institute of Catholic Culture, Bishop James Conley.
Welcome, Your Grace. Such a blessing to have you here tonight.
Thank you, Father, and thank you, Becky, for that kind introduction. So let us begin with prayer, and picking up on Newman. This is actually probably familiar to a lot of people, but it's more of a short little meditation, but we'll start with the prayer. This is by John Henry Newman. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
God has created me to do him some definite service. He's committed some work to me, which he has not committed to another. I have my mission. I may never know it in this life, but I shall be told it in the next. I am a link in a chain, a bond of connection between persons. He has not created me for naught. I shall do good. I shall do his work. I shall be an angel of peace, a preacher of truth in my own place while not intending it, if I do but keep his commandments. Therefore, I will trust him. Whatever, wherever I am, I can never be thrown away. If I am in sickness, my sickness may serve him. In perplexity, my perplexity may serve him. If I am in sorrow, my sorrow may serve him. He does nothing in vain. He knows what he is about. He may take away my friends. He may throw me among strangers. He may make me feel desolate, make my spirit sink, hide my future from me. Still, he knows what he's about. St. John Henry Newman, pray for us. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Well, like I said, it's a great privilege to be with you and all of people that are tuning in from all over the world. I understand this is quite humbling to know the reach of this, and I'm so happy that the Institute for Catholic Culture is kind of flourishing and offers so much, and I'm really privileged to open up the academic year with a talk that I hope will be helpful, and I hope it'll kind of help set the tone, or at least support the theme of these courses over this next year. It's a beautiful curriculum. I love the way it's historically aligned, and it's cross-pollinated through all different topics. It's beautiful, and it's kind of really a great way for me to begin. As Becky said in the introduction, I'm a convert to the Catholic faith, and I think it's always good for a teacher to tell a little bit about his or her own story to maybe make some personal connections. And my story, especially my story in my younger years, really kind of shaped and formed the whole trajectory of my life. And I continue to reflect upon those college years as so formative, and I know that they're formative for college students and young people. And that's why I spent most of my priesthood in college ministry, and I love just being around college students because so much happened to me during my college years. So I'll spend about the first 10 minutes talking about that, and then hopefully that'll kind of set the stage for really what the topic that's been given to me, or that I actually chose or decided to talk about, which is the title is Let Them Be Born in Wonder. Let Them Be Born in Wonder. Rediscovering a Christian View of Reality. And there's a quote from John Sr., who was my teacher, but also my godfather. and had a big influence on me. And I'll talk a little bit about him, as well as the other two professors that directed the Integrated Humanities program at the University of Kansas. And this is a quote from John Sr. "Wonder is the beginning of knowledge, the reverent fear that beauty strikes within us." Again, wonder is the beginning of knowledge, the reverent fear that beauty strikes within us. So I came up to the University of Kansas in the early 70s as a young high school student, going into freshman year of college, and I had really a lousy public education. I was a public school kid. Of course, I wasn't Catholic. I never really had been introduced to anything more than, rock and roll and sports and other things that go along with that. As I say, I went to the University of Kansas because I knew they had a great basketball tradition, and I was really into the Grateful Dead, and that music drew me into a whole world that KU had both of those. So by providence, and that's why I started with Newman, because Newman was a great believer in divine providence, I kind of stumbled into the Integrated Humanities program, which was just getting started at the University of Kansas. Now, when you hear about the program, it sounds like an honors program or something that's for gifted students. But believe me, I was not a gifted student, and I know it was not an honor student at all. And so that was the beauty of the program, that it attracted all kinds of students from all different backgrounds. And it was started by three professors, Dennis Quinn, Frank Nellick, and John Sr. And they were all veteran teachers, tenured professors at the University of Kansas. Two were English professors, and Senior was a classics professor. And they had sort of collectively decided that there's a real crisis in higher education. And so they decided they would put together an integrated curriculum, kind of like what we just saw, the Institute for Catholic Culture does, spanning historically from early ancients all the way to modern. And they would do it over 4 semesters, and it would be a 6-hour course each semester during your freshman and sophomore year. And the real attraction, interestingly enough, they got an endowment, or got a grant from the Endowment for the Humanities, which is not known for a traditional organization, but they got a grant to do an experiment in tradition. And so they launched this program, which was very popular. There were 150 students in my class when I started in the fall of 1973. And it was basically a great books program, but it was more than a great books program. The theme of the motto of the program was "Let them be born in wonder." It was put into the Latin, and it's by that very prolific author, Anonymous. And it was "Nascantur in admiratione," which is the Latin, "Let them be born in wonder." And the professors really wanted the students to be reborn in wonder, to discover again truth, goodness, and beauty for the first time for me and for many of us, through literature, art, music, poetry, and friendship. And I used to say that I kind of read my way into the Catholic Church, which it sounded like it was an intellectual journey, like Newman, my mentor. But mine really, there was an intellectual component to it. But when I look back now, decades later, it was really, there was the intellectual aspect through the great books, but it was the friendships that I made during those years. And it was the example of virtue lived out in other people. Newman has this wonderful quote where he says, the greatest power on earth, next to supernatural grace, is the example of virtue in another person. And think about your own lives. Next to the power of supernatural grace, which is the greatest power in the universe, the next most powerful thing is the example of goodness, truth, and beauty in another person, lived out in the flesh in real time. And when we think about those who've had the most influence on our lives, maybe our parents, our siblings, our friends, our teachers, our priest, it's seeing that virtue lived out in another person, in flesh, incarnated. And so when I look back at my conversion after all these years, it really was the friendships that were forged during those years. And I had an opportunity to think about this because I was invited to give the commencement address at Thomas Aquinas College. in May of 2023. And it's interesting that they invited me because and I was able to kind of go back into the archives and read through some fascinating exchange of letters between John Sr., who was my teacher, and Ronald MacArthur, who was the president and co-founder of Thomas Aquinas College. They were friends, they were colleagues, and they would write back and forth a series of letters in the late 60s talking about the crisis of education, because both of them were seasoned professors, and they were discovering that as students were coming up on campus, they were more and more ill-equipped to study serious things. And so what do we do? Well, Ronald MacArthur, being a good Thomist, he says there's a crisis of reason. The young people can't think. They haven't had logic. They need a grounding in philosophy and St. Thomas Aquinas. And in this exchange of one set of letters in 1968, Senior writes back and says, Ron, I don't disagree with you. I said, you're right. There is a crisis of reason. But he says, but before we can restore the reason, we have to restore the imagination. He says, there's a greater crisis of the imagination. And all, as St. Thomas teaches, all knowledge comes through the senses. And if there's a distortion in the senses, and if there's a distortion in the imagination, then how can we possibly restore the reason without restoring the imagination first? They need poetry. Their souls are deprived. They become flat-souled, and they become deprived of any kind of poetic, imaginative life. And so they went back and forth. It was kind of a friendly debate. And so Ronald MacArthur goes off and founds Thomas Aquinas College in California in the fall of 1972. And John Sr. teams up with Dennis Quinn and Frank Nellick also in the fall of 1972, actually fall of 71, and founds the Integrated Humanities Program. So I was in the third full class of the Humanities Program. And so they both were successful. But I believe, and of course, I'm taking Senior's side in this debate, and it was funny because I kind of poked fun when I was at Thomas Aquinas, and it was all good, because it's like so many things Catholic. It's not an either or; it's a both and. We both have to restore the imagination, and we have to restore the reason, and they have to do that together. But one comes before the other, and so that's why John Senior chose the Integrated Humanities Program. So in addition to reading the great books, and we started with the Greeks in the first semester of our freshman year, we read the Odyssey, which was the very first book I ever really read in my life. I don't think I ever read a book in high school all the way through. Maybe Catcher in the Rye, So the Odyssey was the first book I ever read, and it blew me away. And it was taught, it was an exciting adventure of this wonderful hero, Odysseus. And then we followed with, we read some Plato dialogues, and we read the Greek tragedy plays. We read Aesop's fables, and these kinds of things. And then the second semester, we read Roman authors. We started with the Aeneid, the history of the founding of Rome. We read Caesar's Gallic Wars. We read Ovid. And then we completed that first year by reading Ovid was the last book we read. And so the first year was all pagan, and no Christian, no really any theology. And then the second year we started with excerpts from the Bible taught as literature, because this is a state university, so you can't do Bible studies or anything like that. You have to teach it as literature. So we read passages, beautiful passages from the scriptures and the Old Testament and New. And then we went through St. Augustine, Boethius, the life of Charlemagne, and we ended that semester by reading The Little Flowers of St. Francis. And then this last semester, we began with the Canterbury Tales and Don Quixote, which sort of set the stage for the modern era. And then we went all the way through. The last book we read was The Oregon Trail. So those were the books that we read. And like I said, that was important because it presented truth, goodness, and beauty through literature, the greatest that's ever been said and done, like Matthew Arnold quoted, the best that's ever been written or done. But more important than that and that's why they call it the integrated humanities program, is that alongside the reading, we also memorized reams and reams of poetry. Every Monday night, we would get together with an older upperclassman, and we would just memorize poetry. I didn't know what I was memorizing, but these were great poems, and they wanted us to fill the imagination with a repertoire of poetry because we had no poetry in our souls. And so we just repeated poetry and learning poem after poem after poem, usually great English poems from the great English poets, but also some American poems. Robert Frost was really popular. And then, so we had the poetry going, and then before every lecture on a Tuesday and Thursday, it was always begun with a song. And usually it was an upperclassman, usually a young lady who was very attractive. So everybody was all the guys were paying close attention to her. And she would teach us these songs. And usually they were American folk songs or great English ballads like Full Gently, Sweet Afton, and My Old Kentucky Home, of all those endearing young charms, and all of these beautiful ballads and folk songs. So we were being filled with music at the same time. And then we would also, and they really put an emphasis on getting outside. And this was before screens. And so we would have stargazing sessions where we go out in the evening, out into the country outside of Lawrence, Kansas, where the sky is filled with stars. You can almost touch them. And we would learn the constellations. We'd have an older student who would point out, and we'd be able to identify the different constellations because we were reading this Greek mythology. And so these Greek gods and goddesses were all part of the literature we were reading. And that point was not so much to learn astronomy or to learn the constellations, but was just to get us to look up, in wonder. And I remember as a high school senior, they had the brochure, they had a college fair, and on the front of the brochure that advertised the Integrated Humanities program was a typical college kid back in the 70s, long hair. We all had long hair. Remember I said Grateful Dead? We all had long hair, and he was standing in a field, jeans, a t-shirt, looking up to the stars, and you could see the Big Dipper in the background. It was all kind of a pen and ink illustration. And the caption was, Nascantur in admirazione, let them be born in wonder. So the whole purpose was to get the students to look up and to think deeply about truth and goodness and beauty without any religious, connotations explicitly. But of course, they were three believers. But when it started out, two of them were Catholic, and the third one was not a Catholic, which we always thought that Frank Nellick was, but he converted along the way. So he converted himself along the way through the program. So they didn't really intend to bring faith, although it just happened organically. Like I tell people, it was really the liberal arts that converted me to the Catholic faith. And then, in addition to these experiences of wonder, and these were really, these were experiences of wonder through poetry and music and the stars, but also, as you can imagine, friendships developed, and romance was in the air, and the most powerful event of the year. In the fall, we had an outdoor fair where we would learn crafts, and we would have grease pig contests and pike driving contests and just different things like that, kind of traditional fare. And that was fun in the fall. But in the spring, students organized a formal waltz. And we would hire the university orchestra, live orchestra, and we'd rent out the university ballroom at the student union. And of course, none of us knew how to waltz, right? I mean, again, Grateful Dead. So we had to learn how to waltz. We had to learn how to escort a young lady out onto the dance floor and do this very different kind of dance with grace and dignity. And so we had to have waltzing lessons for months in advance because nobody knew how to waltz. But then the night of the waltz came. It was at the end of the spring semester, and the men would have to rent these very uncomfortable tuxedos. And back in the 70s, they were even more comfortable than they are now. And then the ladies would have these beautiful long gowns, and you'd get a card which had 6 ladies' names on them. You didn't know who they were. And there would be 6 Straussian waltzes, and that would be the whole evening. But the waltzes were 10, 15 minutes long. So you had to go find her, escort her out onto the dance floor, do this dance and not be a klutz, and then take her back to the table and then find your next partner. So the course of the evening, everyone was sort of lifted up to this truth and goodness and beauty of music and dance and grace. And that was transformative. And of course, there was an after waltz party and an after waltz party, and went into the wee hours of the night. So I tell that story because that kind of explains how it was much more than just a great books program. It was much more than an intellectual pursuit, and I think that's important to keep in mind because we really live in a world today which is focused up here in the intellect, whether it be in technology in front of screens like we're here tonight, but in every other way. And so the professors realized that we needed, as John Sr. would always say, contact with the really real, the really real. He would say that. And I always wondered, like, what does that mean? And as a young 18-year-old, I didn't really know what he was saying. And then the other thing, Frank Nellick, who was, and a lot of times John Sr. is the one who gets all the acclaim, but John Sr. wouldn't have been able to do what he did if it weren't for Dennis Quinn and Frank Nellick. And Dennis Quinn, Professor Quinn, who was an English professor, he was sort of the administrator of the program, and he kind of kept Senior from going way off into the mystical clouds, and he kept Frank Nellick from taking his switchblade out of his pocket and cleaning his fingernails during class. Now, this was also a time when you could smoke, and so Frank Nellick would chain smoke, non-filter Camel cigarettes during the whole lecture, and he'd be just smoking, and he'd be blowing smoke rings as he's talking, and of course everybody's just looking at him and wondering when he's going to pull out the switchblade. But Frank Nellick would always say, rocks are hard and water is wet. I mean, right in the middle of a lecture, he'd look at us and he said, rocks are hard, water's wet. We thought he was insane. We thought he was completely stark raving mad. But what he was saying, what he's getting a point across, is there is such a thing as objective reality. And you can't explain away if somebody hits you in the head with a rock. You can't explain that away other than, denying that it happened. And if you're thrown into a lake, you're going to realize that water is wet. And he kept repeating that because he knew that we were becoming further detached from reality. And that's what the professors wanted us to do. What wanted the students to experience was kind of a full immersion into reality. And that's why that's kind of when I described what this topic was going to be about, is the importance of seeing the world through integrated lenses of faith in a Christian anthropology, and an experience that's connected to the real. So with that not so brief introduction, that kind of sets the stage for kind of really what I want to talk about. And again, it all kind of goes back to those college years for me. I've been a bishop for 16 years. I was 4.5 years in Denver, Colorado as an auxiliary bishop under Archbishop Charles Chaput, who was a man who influenced me in so many ways. He's the reason why I'm a bishop today. And he, I think, is one of the greatest teachers of our time. He still has a strong voice. In fact, he'll turn 80 on Thursday, so keep Archbishop Chaput in your prayers. He's still very healthy. And then I was transferred to Lincoln. And as I have been here now for 12 years, and I went through a rough time, and I'll talk about this a little bit. I had to take a leave of absence to attend to my mental health, and was really experiencing anxiety, and it went into depression, and I really just had to take some time off to really get some rest and to kind of recalibrate my whole life. And after coming back from my leave of absence, and I wrote a pastoral letter, which I published last May, which some of you may have come across, A Future with Hope. And it's on my own journey in mental mental illness and kind of sharing my story, but also offering hopefully some ideas that if anybody's struggling in that with mental health or you know of somebody that is, it might be helpful. But as I came back and it was during, I could say I took a leave of absence for health reasons in December of 2019, and then the whole world took a leave of absence in March of 2020 when the pandemic hit. So coming back from my own struggles with mental health, and then and after the pandemic, I kind of refocused my Episcopal ministry and going back to Jesus, we know Jesus is his primary mission he was a teacher and a healer. And if we look at the history of the Catholic Church, Catholic education or Catholic healthcare and Catholic education have been something that the Church has been involved in from the very beginning. And so the healing ministry, the healing profession, and the teaching profession goes to the very heart of the mission of Jesus Christ. And that's why this forum is so important, because this is focusing on Jesus the teacher. And we know that that was his most popular title, right? I mean, when he rose from the dead and Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and she didn't recognize him until he called her by name. Again, a very personal encounter by name, one-to-one. He said, Mary, and she responded not with Lord or Master or Jesus. She said, teacher, Rabboni, because he was known to be a teacher. So the intellectual life and the teaching of Jesus Christ and seeing everything through the lens of that incarnational faith that we all have puts everything into perspective. And that's why we need to see all of reality through the lens of our faith. And so I kind of came to the understanding that I am going to devote the rest of my years, how many ever the Lord gives me as a bishop, to Catholic education and Catholic healthcare. So I'm also the Episcopal advisors to the Catholic Medical Association. And I'm also one of the founding members of the Catholic Healthcare Leadership Alliance, which is trying to put Christ back in the center of healthcare. And again, both of these areas, Catholic education and Catholic healthcare, have been distorted and have been corrupted. And we don't need to get into the litany of the reasons why, although I'll name a few. And really, we've kind of, both in Catholic education and Catholic healthcare, we have lost our way in the mainstream. Now, there's great signs of hope and restoration, both in healthcare and in education. It's springing up all over. And so I'm not a pessimist, but for the most part, the institutional side of the church in these areas is off the rails. And I know you're probably familiar with this little book that was published by the University of Mary, and I highly recommend it. Monsignor Jim Shea, the president of UMary, was the editor, and it's called From Christendom to Apostolic Mission. And the thesis of that book is that, we are more like the times of the apostles than we are Christendom. We still have the remnants of Christendom in our institutions, and as a bishop, I have to keep those institutions going. I've got 24 elementary schools and 6 high schools that I have to run, and we have 3 Catholic hospitals in my diocese. So I have to be fully engaged in kind of the institution of education and healthcare. But at the same time, we also have to think outside the box on the different ways we deliver education and healthcare. And there's all kinds of wonderful grassroots movements in both the area of education, where you talk about academies or homeschooling or the Chesterton Academies or all these kind of things. And there's beautiful things like Bella in Denver, which is a full whole person healthcare delivery, which started out as a crisis pregnancy center, but now is a full-blown hospital and full-blown clinic with 6 physicians on staff, with the Blessed Sacrament in the center of the doctor's office. So you go make a visit to our Lord in the Blessed Sacrament, and then you go see your OBGYN. And there's clinics like this springing up all over. St. Gianna's in Green Bay, Wisconsin, Tapayek in Arlington, and they're coming up, and we're actually having a symposium on these to bring them all together so they can be talking to each other. And that brings up the second point, is that one of the reasons why we're off the rails, and this fits into what Father Hezekiah was talking about with the curriculum, is sort of a disintegration and a false Christian anthropology. So disintegration, we have kind of separated and bifurcated so much of our learning and healthcare. And I'll just talk about learning with specialization. And part of it, and it really goes back to, a false anthropology, and seeing in this technocracy in which we live, education has become what I call industrialized, so that it's become highly pragmatic and utilitarian, so that the purpose of education for a child is to test well, in standardized tests, and then so they could get into the best universities, so they can get the best degrees to get the best jobs. I mean, that's what's driving education in the secular world, and I'm afraid too in some of our Catholic institutions. And so that's just a false anthropology, that really education is about the formation of the whole person, not this kind of highly pragmatic way of looking at the human person. But the mind, the heart, the imagination, the full person in virtue and in the intellectual life. And that's true. And I'm not against, the STEM courses or anything like that. It's important. But it's the formation of the whole person, beginning with the imagination, as Dr. Senior would say, a restoration of the imagination, but also a deep immersion into the intellectual life of the church. And St. Thomas Aquinas, is the master angelic doctor in that. Philosophy and theology and literature and poetry, and the Pope Francis just came out with a beautiful document on the importance of literature in human formation, because he's a big reader. His favorite book is that great Italian epic novel, I Promessi Sposi, the Betrothed, which is a beautiful epic. Every Italian high school kid has to read that book, and it's a beautiful romance, and it's just a wonderful piece of literature. So it's the education of the whole person in an integrated way. And so one of the things we're doing in the Diocese of Lincoln is we're revising our whole high school curriculum to do two things. One, to align it historically, like this curriculum is, the ancients, the medieval, and the modern, and a whole sweep through history, all of the courses. And then to cross-pollinate courses and integrate courses, so that our English teachers are talking to our theology teachers, and our science and biology and labs teachers are talking to our history teachers, and integrating all of these fields of knowledge together to be on mission and to be focused on the true, the good, and the beautiful, whether it be in the biology lab or on the drama stage or out on the football field. And that doesn't take away from these individual sciences and their own specific disciplines, but instead of staying in your own lane all the time and in your own silo, that you're seeing the big picture. And that's part of the reason why healthcare and education, I think, have gone off the rails, is because we've become so highly specialized. I mean, look at medicine. You become super, super specialized in one particular field, and you've been trained in everything else, but I just had foot surgery a couple of years ago because my feet are a mess because I ran so many. I was a runner my whole life, but thanks be to God, I had the best foot doctor in the city who put my feet back together. So I'm not opposed to specialization, but the thing is, we need to see the whole person. We need to see the whole person. And so whether you're a teacher or a doctor, you have to look at your student or your patient as this person who is made in the image and likeness of God, who's full of mystery, and who is to be, in a certain sense, kind of revered. And it's a privilege to be able to teach a student, because you're having an impact on their formation, their eternal soul. And as a physician, you're healing someone and bringing them back to physical health, but also you're healing them spiritually, mentally, because I'm sure they're stressed out in psychological ways and those kinds of things. So it's a whole kind of integrated approach to both education and healthcare. So this whole disintegrated view has been a corrupting influence, I think, on education. And so we have to restore a proper anthropology. And part of that is to, again, to have contact with the really real. And so that's why I think it's important for us to get away from screens a lot, and that we spend too much time in front of screens, and to get outside and into the outdoors. And there's a wonderful book that I'll plug, and many of you probably heard about it. It's called The Anxious Generation. It's a New York Times bestseller, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness by Jonathan Haidt. He also wrote a very popular book called The Coddling of the American Mind, you may have come across. But I make mention of his book because he says, in a secular psychological sense, he says exactly what I'm saying, because he has this wonderful part in the middle of the book where he looks at childhood. And he makes a difference between, he shows the difference between a phone-based, screen-based childhood and a play-based childhood. And there's where he's talking about the imagination. And he's saying that parents unwittingly have given young people, their children, kind of an unlimited access to the virtual world. And he's not talking about pornography, that's bad enough, but just this whole virtual world, when they're in discovery mode, and that's how they're discovering. And they've given, and then at the same time, they have a kind of a highly structured, very supervised observance of the play world. In other words, the children don't have a lot of unstructured, unsupervised play. And that's what they need. And he goes through, he just shows a contrast of the difference, showing what the rules of playground were like 30 years ago, and the rules now. You need like 4 billboards to show all the rules there are in the playground so kids don't get hurt. And he talks about safetyism, because he has a wonderful thing here, and I just want to quote this. He says that young people, and this plays into what I'm saying, is he says that young people need freedom. And I know freedom is a major theme. And when you think about it, and parents are not to blame because they're afraid that their children are going to get abducted and they can't let them out of their sight. And I understand that's a real fear for parents. But that's robbing them of a freedom that they need, especially as they're growing up as a child and into adolescence. And he says that they need freedom because they need to have there's children seek 6 things when they're young. They love heights, such as climbing trees and playground structures. They need high speed, such as swinging and going down fast slides. They need dangerous tools, such as hammers and drills. They need dangerous elements, like experimenting with fire. They need rough and tumble play, like wrestling. And they also like to disappear. They like to hide. And these are things that kids are being deprived of, and he goes through that. And think about it. Those, we all experienced those things when we were growing up. And he says that, not only does it overcome fear of those things, heights, speed, whatever, but it also creates joy, because fear and joy are kind of coupled together. And that gets back to that wonderful quote from John Sr., where he says that wonder is the beginning of knowledge, the reverent fear that beauty strikes within us. And so this is where we need kind of to restore the imagination, I think, for young people. And I always come back to that wonderful book by Joseph Pieper, Leisure, the Basis of Culture, because we need a certain amount of play. Leisure comes from the Greek word skola, which means school. So really, schools should be places of leisure and play. And that's why, and now I'm going to shamelessly plug, there's a link on the show notes, my new pastoral letter entitled The Joy and Wonder of Catholic Education, Developing Authentically Catholic Schools. And what I talk about is that schools should be a place of joy and wonder. Kids should want to get there as first thing in the morning, because they're going to a place where they're going to see their friends, where they're going to learn beautiful things, where they're going to discover, and where they're going to fall in love. And I'm afraid that schools have become burdens for kids because of over-testing, over-standardization, too many worksheets, all these kind of things. And this is getting back to my own experience when I was in college. I discovered all these things for the first time because my public education up to the time I was 18 was this very industrialized, kind of soulless experience until I got to college. And that's when I was introduced to wonder for the first time. So finally, and I'll kind of wrap it up here in the next 10 minutes or so after I take a drink. Thank you. I love that Father Hezekiah made this comment at the beginning about seeing everything through the lens of our faith. And I've been at the graduation commencement at all 6 high schools. I use this, so I'm glad. I hope nobody from our high schools is on this class tonight, because I told this story. But you know, I have pretty bad eyesight, and I can see your faces now a little bit, but I can't really see very well. And if I were to go outside and drive home, look out. I'd either be a danger to myself or those around me. But when I put my glasses on, everything comes into focus. It's clear. Now, I got a new set of glasses last winter. And when I got home, I took the glasses off, and they're made by a Protestant company. And the name of the glasses company is the Eyes of Faith. The Eyes of Faith. And there's a little scripture verse on the interior trim. It says, I will sing to the Lord all my life, Psalm 104. I didn't realize I was getting Christian glasses, but I used this analogy that this is like our faith. We should never take it off. Now, sometimes people will put their faith glasses on Sundays when they go to Mass and they pray, and then they come home and they put the glasses down and they're walking around, not being able to see clearly the rest of the week. So in their business and in their communities and in their social interaction, even in their voting, during this election, they're not looking and voting with the eyes of faith, because we should see everything through the eyes of faith. That makes sense of things. We can't. I use this example in my pastoral letter. You end up depriving yourself of really what it is to be human. And I start my pastoral letter with that wonderful quote from Saint Irenaeus, and which is, "The glory of God is man fully alive." And God wants us to be fully alive. He wants us to see things clearly. He wants us to make connection between things, especially persons, but also every subject and every topic. And I use this example. It's like giving a child a 10,000-piece jigsaw puzzle and not showing them the picture on the box. They just have all these disparate pieces, and they're supposed to put them together into a whole. But they don't know what it's supposed to look like in the end. They don't see the big picture because they don't have the picture on the box of the puzzle. That's the way a lot of education is. It's been so fragmented and so disintegrated that we can't see the whole picture. So seeing through the eyes of faith means that we always look at everything, no matter what it is, no matter what topic it is in school. If we're in the biology lab, or we're studying geography, or we're on the drama stage, seeing everything through the eyes of faith. It doesn't mean you have to mention Jesus every word in the class. No, that's not what it is. The secular sciences have their own beauty in it. And if we believe that the whole world, and this is another important point, and it has to do with anthropology, and that is that we have to have sacramental imaginations. Now, we know that a sacrament, the 7 sacraments, the definition from the Catechism is, a sacrament is an outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace. That's what a sacrament is, and that's what the seven sacraments do. But the whole world is a sacrament with a small s. The whole world is an outward sign instituted by God to give grace. And so to see the fingerprints of God in everything, He's everywhere, but we have to have the eyes to see, and that's why the glasses come in. I mean, we can't go around, blurry-eyed. We have to look and see things and see the connection of things. That's a beautiful thing that Newman that says in the prayer. He says that I am a link in a chain, a bond and connection between persons. We're all connected, and none of us is alone. We're all in this together, and this is where kind of my mental health crisis struck, was when I had adapted this sort of ungodly self-reliance. I'm the bishop, so I have to figure out everybody's problems, and the buck stops with me. And I isolated myself, and I became very alone in my own head. And my problems began by not sleeping, because I was trying to figure things out all through the night, not getting a good night's sleep. And that's too much in your head. We need to get out of our heads and to really, have this sacramental imagination. Get outside, and I'll talk at the very end here about some practical points that we can do. So seeing the world through the integrated lens of faith and a sound Christian anthropology. And this is what we need to restore, and we can do that in very simple ways. Newman has a great quote, and I quote him in my pastoral letter, about the importance of the imagination. And this is a famous quote, so some of you will know about this quote. It's an interesting. Newman had a debate with a public debate in the London Times between him and Sir Robert Peel, who was a member of Parliament. And Robert Peel, this was the Industrial Revolution, and Robert Peel said, it's time to put an end to the liberal arts. He says, because we need factory workers, we need trained, skilled workers. The liberal arts don't serve any practical purpose, and so therefore there's no place for the liberal arts. And of course, that kind of incited Newman. He never walked away from controversy. And so he had this public debate of a series of articles that were exchanged in the London Times, which eventually were put into a book called the Tamworth Reading Room Letters. And in one of them, Newman was great, in the way he would argue, because he was such a master of the English language, perhaps the greatest English prose writer that ever lived, in addition to being a saint. As you can tell, I'm a big fan of Newman. Anyway, he says, and he talks about the importance of the imagination. And this is what Newman said to Peel. The heart is commonly reached, not through the reason. Let me repeat that. This kind of drives Thomists crazy. And I quoted this at the Thomas Aquinas commencement address, and I kind of paused, and I looked out to see if anybody would fall out of their chair. So they didn't. I said, the heart is commonly reached, not through the reason, but through the imagination, by means of direct impressions, by the testimony of facts and events, by history, by description. Persons influence us, voices melt us, looks subdue us, deeds inflame us. Many a man will live and die upon a dogma. No man will be a martyr for a conclusion. And what Newman is saying is that it's the heart, cor ad cor, loquitur, heart speaking to heart. And the imagination is what leads us to the truth, goodness, and beauty of the world. The humanities professors, I quote this, is the KU professors who founded the Integrated Humanities Program firmly believed that a true education should engender, quote, a birth of the human spirit, an entry into a new world that excites interest because it is seen in the light of wonder. And wonder is the beginning of knowledge, the reverent fear that beauty strikes within us, end of quote. And so let me just kind of conclude by saying that, that this restoration of imagination through precisely these courses that you're teaching, through history, through great literature, through poetry, through music, through friendship, and obviously goes without saying, prayer. And I didn't say much about prayer, and I'm in the prayer business, so I'm sorry. I apologize, Lord, that I haven't talked about prayer. But that kind of goes without saying, because, one of the reasons I think why we've lost our ways, we live in a very noisy world, and there's a real dearth of silence. And a few years ago, Cardinal Sarah wrote a book called The Power of Silence. And we need to carve out periods of silence during our day to get away from our screens, to get away from the noise, to get away from the activity, so that we can rediscover that beauty that is within, and to be reborn, in a certain sense, in our imaginations. So prayer helps us to connect all these things, and it really is at the heart of what we do, and it kind of sets the course. So, in conclusion, it also requires humility. And this is one last point before I make this conclusion. And the liberal arts and what you're studying, one of the things that struck me when I started the humanities program is I saw that there was a much bigger world out there, much bigger than the Grateful Dead, much bigger than KU basketball, although we claim apostolic succession when it comes to basketball because it was invented at the University of Kansas. Just saying. There's this whole world, that I was introduced to, and that causes humility. As Socrates says, to know that we don't know really is the beginning of wisdom. And the liberal arts are especially potent, and these courses that you're taking are especially potent for teaching humility, openness, and appreciation for mystery and freedom. As John Henry Newman noted, the poetic, but when I say the poetic, I don't mean just memorizing poems. That's good. But the poetic is an attitude of the heart. That is to see things from a poetic mode. Professors used to say, our method of, education is all about methodology. Our methodology is the poetic mode. Education by the muses, he said. Education by the 9 muses. And the 9 Greek muses were the muses of memory, right? Those were the 9 muses. So education by the muses means a poetic education. And so, as John Henry Newman noted, the poetic suggests that, quote, and this is Newman, we should not put ourselves above the objects of our study, but at their feet. That we should feel them to be above and beyond us. That we should look up to them instead of fancying that we can comprehend them. This implies a universe filled with wonder, vast, immeasurable, impenetrable, inscrutable, mysterious, so that at best we are only forming conjectures about them, not conclusions. For the phenomena which they present admit of many explanations, and we cannot know the true one. End of quote. This is what wonder is, and this what leads us, to a deeper understanding. So, last point. I know I've said that before. Last point. These are takeaways. Okay. Given the fact that we need to have a deep prayer life, I'm not going to talk about prayer, but I'm presuming that everybody's making holy hours, Eucharistic adoration, saying their prayers every day, maybe praying the liturgy of the hours. That's a given. 1, get outside, go for a walk every day, every day. Did everybody go for a walk today? Don't answer. I hope it's yes. 2, read a good poem every day. Have contact with lyrics. 3, listen to good music, at least a little bit, maybe just for 5 minutes. My current favorite band is the Avett Brothers, which is a Americana band, which are a wonderful band, wonderful lyrics. I saw them this summer. 4, cultivate friendships and invest in them. In other words, don't take them for granted. You only have a circle of so many friends. They're going to be your closest friends. And one of the things that young people say is they don't have a best friend. Well, you know who your closest friends are. And it's easy to take them for granted. Stay in touch with them, even if they're on the other side of the country. Text them, call them, get together with them. And I know everybody's busy, but we have to take the effort to keep those friendships and cultivate those friendships. And 5, silence. Have some periods of silence. And that's where prayer can come back in. A Eucharistic adoration chapel, if you have one in your city or town, you can be at least reasonably certain you're not going to be interrupted if you leave your cell phone in the car. And there's where you can have silence. So not only does this help to restore the imagination, to be reborn in wonder, but it's also good for your mental health. Believe me, it's good for your mental health. So I'll end with that. Thank you very much.
Your Grace, it was what a blessing to be with you this evening. I know that so many gathered from so far here to learn from you have been so blessed as I have been. I just, as you kept speaking, I felt like it was like my life, the Grateful Dead, basketball, and you just left off Bob Dylan. That was the only.
Oh, I could have talked for a while, Bob.
So I just saw Bob Dylan and Willie Nelson in concert, which
Oh
was
my gosh.
which is pretty amazing,
They're both, I think, in their 90s, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's still alive. It's quite yeah. But what a blessing to be together tonight, and you inspired us and taught with us and shared with us so many things that are so near and dear to our heart here at the Institute of Catholic Culture, and I can't imagine a better. I kept texting Becky and Annie, clip that for the Institute. That's like our mission right there. So I hope this is the beginning of many times to be able to be together here at the Institute. So thank you, Your Grace, for being with us this evening. I don't know. I'm sure you have many things demanding your attention, but I wonder if you might stay for a few minutes for a little bit of discussion and Q&A.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Your Grace, just to open things up here, we're just going to write for that central quotation. Bridget is writing in, and a little confused about the quote. Wonder is the beginning of knowledge, which she says, okay, I'm there with you. But the reverent fear that beauty strikes within us, can you just kind of draw that out and help us to understand what John Sr. means by that second phrase, the reverent fear that beauty strikes within us?
Sure. I think when we experience something very beautiful, there is a strange, and I can't really explain it, but there's almost a fear that comes over us because of its magnitude. It's sort of like it overwhelms us, and so but it's reverent. It's not a servile fear. In other words, it's not like we want to run away. But I have to use this example. But like for instance, when let's say as a high school boy, and you meet this very beautiful woman, I mean, you're struck by this beauty, but you're deathly afraid of her. You're deathly afraid you're gonna make a fool of yourself. And I was thinking about that when we were waltzing. I mean, we were filled with fear and beauty at the same time when we were trying to take a young lady out and dance with her on the floor. But so there is this sort of, because I think it's a different kind of fear. It's sort of like a fear of the Lord, right? I mean, there's a good example. A lot of people think, well, we should in fact, they even tried to get rid of fear of the Lord as one of the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit. They call it wonder. Well, it's wonder, but no, it's fear, because we are, but it's a fear that engenders love and admiration.
Thank you so much, Bishop. Bishop, we have so many questions coming in. We could keep you here all night. We're going to go ahead and go to someone on screen. Peter on screen. Go ahead and take yourself off of mute and ask your question for the bishop.
Thank you very much, Your Grace. This is a real pleasure. So my question has to do with inspiring wonder in others. So I work for a liberal arts-oriented education nonprofit, but it primarily deals with the American political tradition, and I work a lot with college students. And so I meet a lot of college students who are very academically engaged, but very much so politically inclined. And so they're looking at political theory questions and political philosophy questions, and they maybe have lost some of that appreciation for poetry and literature and just wonder in general that you've talked about. So my question is, what is a way you might suggest to talk to some of these students who are very intelligent to kind of steer them back towards wonder in addition to that important political philosophy they're studying?
Aside from kind of the intellectual, I think that's just forming relationships, and then doing things outside. I mean, if you've got a group that is interested in like these political ideas, we'll go out and go out into the park and talk about them, and just get outside and kick those ideas around, and just let sort of organically things will come up, as opposed to sort of getting in a dark room or an artificially lit room and argue political ideas. But I think again, get outside and experience each other's kind of friendship.
Your Grace, you mentioned friendship a number of times in your talk, and we have an anonymous question coming in, kind of a statement with a question, okay? And so the person says, it's really hard to find Catholic friends. In the church today, friendship is so hard. She mentions me. She said, Father Hezekiah is always talking about how our churches ought to be the center of our social life, but my church is not like that. It's huge. No one knows me, and I don't know anyone. And I'm hungry for what you describe, but it's so foreign to my Catholic experience. What can you recommend?
Well, one thing that is really popular here are small book clubs, and to get one person, one or two people together and just say, hey, let's get together and let's read a book together and find something. And it doesn't have to be anything profound, but something that's delightful to do together. And that gets you together. And then, why not get some wine and cheese or something like that, to kind of, that's really kind of what the tradition of friendship is always kind of built around a meal, to prepare a meal for someone. You invite somebody over for dinner, things like that. But I know that that's a hard thing because a lot of parishes are so big where, it's hard to make friends. Maybe there's a youth group or a young adult group that could get together and do things that enjoy each other's company. But that's a very good question. But I think you have to start small. Small is beautiful. Just find one person and then get another person who's like-minded, and just start a little book club or go to a movie, things like that. I can start out simple.
I know, Becky, you have a question coming in, but Your Grace, could I just add? I'm sorry to add something to your comment.
Go ahead.
But sometimes, guys, practically just staying around church instead of leaving right away. Even if your church is really big, and being willing to be there, even if it's just for a cup of coffee or whatever, just to stay. You never know who the Lord's going to put in your life, but you have to have that opportunity for him to do that. And just to be willing to stay around, clean up the pews after Mass, just do something to walk around and be there. And I bet you the Lord's going to bless you, and you're going to meet somebody, and then that friendship's going to start to build. Becky, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Father. Bishop, we have so many, there must be a lot of homeschool parents that joined this evening to watch. We have a lot of homeschool questions coming in. And I have to admit, Bishop, as a homeschool mom myself, I really wanted to take this question so we could get some answers from you. But we have a lot of moms or parents writing in asking ways to either find John Senior's curriculum or have access to good curriculum, or ways we can instill that imagination in our kids and not be so caught in that institution. So if there's any encouragement or advice or anything that you could offer homeschooling parents as they're looking to form children in education.
Well, there's so much out there, so many resources. I mean, the whole homeschooling community has really developed a lot over the last few decades. So I think if you just Google through there and see, Mother of God, that's a great homeschooling out of Virginia. But also the Chesterton Academy, that Dale Alquist has developed a whole curriculum there for high school kids. So there's a lot of resources that are available if you just search Catholic homeschoolers. Yeah, and then what was the other part of the question? Was it curriculum and?
Yeah, access to John Senior's curriculum.
Oh, yeah, John Senior.
Outside of that institution or industrial kind of thought.
Right. No, one of the things that I'm on the board of directors, and I was also on the founders committee for Wyoming Catholic College. And I know Kyle Washut, I saw he's one of your professors. So Kyle has taken on himself to republish the complete works of John Senior. He didn't write a whole lot, but his letters and some things that are not in publication now, he's putting them all together. So that'll be made available here in the next year or so. And of course, there's a wonderful biography of John Senior called The Restoration of Realism by Father Francis Bethel, who also I think has been on Father Bethel. He's the prior of Clear Creek. So Clear Creek Abbey was founded by a bunch of my classmates who became monks in France at Foncombeau, and then they came back and founded Clear Creek in 1999, and this year is celebrating its 25th anniversary. But he wrote a biography, really the definitive biography of John Senior, which is still in print. the restoration of realism.
Nice. Your Grace, there's a number of questions coming in related, all related. One of them happens to be coming from one of my parishioners who's never asked me this question. So Dr. Samora, I mean, come on, at least ask your pastor, But the question is basically, I'm going to put the three of them together. What is your favorite literary work? Is there a book that you read maybe several times in your life, or even you read it annually? I don't know. Or your favorite piece of poetry? If you say this is my cherished treasure, of course, besides the sacred scriptures.
Right. Okay. Wow. I would say that as far as books that have been impactful for me have been the Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius. And of course, and the Confessions of St. Augustine, that had a tremendous impact on me. And believe it or not, I still go back. You talk about what I read and reread. A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, which has both history, love, heroism, sacrifice, beauty. I just love that. I love that novel. Poetry, I'm a big fan of Gerard Manley Hopkins, so anything by Hopkins. Also, I'm a big fan of William Wordsworth. I think he was the greatest of the Romantic poets. So anything by Wordsworth, I think, is really good. Yeah, so those are some things. I could go on and on, but that's
well, and we don't want to keep you too long this evening. We know you have many things to attend to, and to be honest with you, to live out this evening, I am going home, and a family's coming over. I prepared ossobuco and slow cooked oxtail, and that I this afternoon, and it's been cooking. What's that?
It's been in the crock pot all day.
It's been cooking, slow cooking for about 8 hours. And I'm going to sear some mushrooms and a little butter and white wine. It's going to be only delicious. And then have that friendship. And, this is why we do cooking at the ICC. We not only we do cooking evenings, we do music evenings, because as the bishop was saying, we got to form the whole person. We got to regain our Catholic way of life. And I'm just going to go back to something I said earlier, and we conclude this evening with your blessing, Your Grace, is that there's nothing our Catholic faith doesn't impact, and we have to learn to eat again as Catholics. We have to sleep again as Catholics. We have to wake up again as Catholics. We have to walk in the morning as a Catholic. There's a way to live our faith, and when we do that, it's a love that just transforms everything. It transforms everything, and I hope that you get a taste of that at the Institute. And having tasted it, you go back into your parish and begin to live that out and build those friendships and share those truths, share those conversations. Again, begin to dance again, begin to sing again, begin to love again. And then my brothers and sisters, the Catholic faith it's not stoppable, because it's the presence of Christ. It's the presence of God who created this world for love, if we just open our hearts to that. So Bishop Conley, I'm just like absolutely overjoyed. We are going to, if with your permission, we are going to cut up every single quote you made tonight and get it out to as many people as possible and share this beautiful, beautiful presentation. And more than a presentation, it was an evening together. So thank you for that.
Thank you for the privilege of being with you, all of you who I can see, and all of you who I can't see, who can see me. We've got a friendship. That's great. I hope I bump into you in the real world somewhere, somehow. So don't hesitate to come up to me and say, hey, I was on that class that you had at ICC. So it's wonderful to make 1,000 new friends.
That's wonderful. I'm going to send Becky Poncini over to your office with a nice bottle of wine in the next couple of days, so she doesn't live too far from you. And
that's right. We just discovered that. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. If you could please bless us in concluding our evening.
Okay, and then I'm going to conclude as I began with Newman. He's got a wonderful little evening prayer, and then I'll give everyone a blessing. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. May he support us all the day long, till the shades lengthen and the evening comes, and the busy world is hushed, and the fever of life is over, and our work is done. Then in his mercy, may he give us safe lodging and a holy rest and peace at the last. And may the blessing of Almighty God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit descend upon you and remain with you forever. Amen.